In the unfinished Swan, you play as a recently orphaned boy named Monroe who has nothing to his name aside from one of his deceased mother's paintings. He wakes up one day to find that the swan has disappeared from its painting, so in the flippant disregard of space-time harbored by conventional miscreants, Monroe follows it into the canvas in order to get it back. The game starts you off in completely white areas, and you splat around paint in order to make the environment visible. There's one trophy you can get for using only 3 paintballs in the first area, but it's too hard. Later levels play off the paintball mechanic, so the whole game doesn't just consist of you blindly painting shit in order to see where you're going. There's one level where you throw water that eventually fades from the areas you're looking at, so you have to remember what you saw or just keep fucking throwing water balls around. That same level has you using water to lead a bunch of vines in order to navigate through the level. Another point has you creating objects with your balls to progress. You'll see the variety in the footage I'm going to show you. What's kind of cool is that the game sets up your adventure through its world like a storybook. There are secret pages that tell of how the king of the kingdom within the canvas had the power to paint shit into existence. His masterpiece was an invisible kingdom, and his story tells of how the needs of his subjects conflicted with the vision he had for his kingdom's aesthetic. The king's masterpiece was the invisible kingdom within the canvas, which you've probably guessed is what Monroe is exploring, but the people of the kingdom complained of not being able to see anything. Resentfully, the king painted shadows on things in his kingdom so there was at least some indication of where objects were in space. The story pages also tell us that the king eventually abandons his city to paint himself a house and a wife, and at that point he starts to paint things just for his wife instead of painting things that he loves. Just before the couple are supposed to have a baby though, the wife vanishes. Of course, the wife was Monroe's mother, the baby was Monroe, and the king was Monroe's father. We learn all of this as Monroe follows his father's progress as an artist, so essentially the game is Monroe's discovery of his parents' histories through the interaction with their art. And that means this is a game about artists, art making, art, and the audience.
This is so pretentious.
Get out of here, status quo Steve. We're playing with our ideas today. The king in this context is the artist. He initially makes the art that he wants to make, the invisible kingdom, but nobody appreciates it and he's ultimately forced to balance his vision as an artist with his responsibilities as a king. Feedback is something that's to the king's distaste. He doesn't care if people can see what he finds valuable in his art. He even sees their interaction with his art as something that can spoil it. He goes so far as to describe Monroe's splattering of his garden as an act of ruination.
Miscreant had painted everything. My garden was ruined.
The thing is, without Monroe's finishing touches and without the feedback of the king's subjects, we wouldn't even know there's a kingdom there. It's when the king begins to respond to criticism and the interaction other people have with his art that his art is called into being. Everything is invisible until it's interacted with or until the king responds to criticism. What instigates the change is the audience. The game acknowledges that art without an audience is unfinished because art is inherently something that is meant to be viewed. You can't expect the audience to understand your art without allowing them to access it in some way. Cool, is this making sense for you? Okay, high five. Let's go. Oh, that was gross. Oh my god. So anyways, when the king creates his ideal audience member, his wife, he starts to make art specifically for her. She doesn't like it though, she abandons him, and the king is left heartbroken and without the will to paint. He actually loses his powers to paint things into existence for a while, until he starts his super ego project. I think this point in the story is supposed to emphasize the dangers of making art solely to please other people. There's always going to be negative reception, and if you try to create something that is universally loved, you won't be making art that's reflective of you anymore. The king only loses his powers when he's lost the audience that he wants. He never finds a balance between painting for himself and painting what other people want to see. What I think the game is getting at is that there's a balance to be found. Art making is a continuous process. The work of art is incomplete without someone to experience it, but behind that work of art is an individual whose entire essence is being poured into the things they're giving life to. The goal of the artist should be to take these things into account and create something that's reflective of themselves, but they should also remember that their art doesn't exist in isolation. There's a whole world out there that can provide the necessary feedback to help the artist grow and thrive, and maybe even create something better. Now, I'm gonna get a little academic here, but there was this dead French deconstructivist named Jacques Derrida. He argued that reading and writing were one and the same act. Derrida believed that the act of interpretation involved the reader extracting elements of a book or work of art and reworking them into a new body of work. Readers, or audiences, have to draw on their past experiences in order to derive any meaning, i.e. knowledge of language, understanding of references and Easter eggs, etc. Those experiences shape the versions of the text that the readers interact with. Basically, you have to use what you know in order to figure shit out, so in making meaning of a text based on their unique experiences, readers author a version of the text that's unique to them. Think about it this way, is your experience with a film going to be the exact same as your friend's experience? What if your friend is colorblind? What if you don't know anything about expressionist paintings, but your friend does, and it turns out there was a shit ton of expressionist art throughout the film? If you're in a theater, you're not sitting in the exact same position relative to the screen, so you're not going to experience the film at the same angle. The point is that barring coincidences, no two people are going to have the same experience or interpretations of every facet of a work of art. Derrida refers to a text as a sort of weaving. The reader removes certain threads from one weaving to be rewoven elsewhere, or they add their own elements to the weaving they took from. In this way, the act of reading involves both removal and addition, writing and rewriting. So, as Derrida states, one must then, in a single gesture but doubled, read and write. I think the question we can pose then, based on Derrida's work and the unfinished Swan, is who is the artist? The concept of ownership over a piece of art is a capitalist intuition. For legal and financial reasons, somebody needs to lay claim to a particular work of art. But imagine if money wasn't a factor. The author of a book doesn't invent the language they use. They don't invent the medium of a novel. They most likely draw inspiration from other stories in the construction of their own. Plus, every reader is going to have a different experience with a text. If we take Derrida's perspective into account, each reader or audience member is creating their own version of a work of art by interacting with it. Nobody's version of Monroe is going to splat paint in the exact same way. I mean, the game is about Monroe finishing his mother's art. So, who's the artist? The characters? The developers of the game? The player? What do you think? Let me know! Oh my god! On that note, I am done. You may go now. Please like or leave a comment. I like to hear what people think. And if you don't have anything to say about the video, you can talk about your poop. Okay, goodbye!
That night, even though he was very tired, Monroe did something that would have made his mother very happy. He painted.
Oh hey, didn't see you there. Guess what? In this video, there were treats. Did you find them? Comment below if you did. I don't know what else to say. Children are great! The power of youth! The power of youth! I'm done, you can stop recording.